What are people searching for? What are people buying? The problem that exists for most brands is that they are too invested in their own product, and they believe that they don't have to niche down because their product is so good and so brilliant and so groundbreaking that they don't have to do any real work to market it. Doing this actual intent and then competitor research allows you to see where the actual opportunity is to market your product rather than just putting out a list of USPs and expecting people to buy it because you think it's the best one on the market. That almost never happens. I love working with Pilot House because while we are a performance marketing agency, we really pride ourselves on caring so much about brand and creative. At Pilot House, we don't just make ads, we craft them. Every edit, every word, every scroll-stopping detail is built with purpose and care, and I truly believe that care drives creativity and creativity drives results. Our attention to both scale and brand allows us to craft strategies that deliver you short-term results while making you long-term successful, which is so important for any DTC brand. If you are curious about learning more about working with Pilot House, you can fill out a lead form at pilothouse.co and let them know you want to go on a brand new ad venture. You don't actually have to say that. You don't have to make a pun. I'm not going to force you to make a pun. Just fill out the lead form. We'd love to chat with you. Hi, welcome back to Ad-venturous, the podcast produced by D2C and hosted by me, Aves. Today, we are going to finish up our conversation from last week, which was about agentic-led shopping strategy. But I will say, I think this is a topic we're going to talk about again and again. It's very interesting to me. I am doing a lot of work on this subject right now, actively with clients, and making a lot of new discoveries and finding new systems and strategies. So we'll keep talking about this, but today is just sort of the wrap up of the intro to this topic. And so if you missed the episode last week, to catch you up, what we're discussing is this idea of humans now outsourcing their decision making to LLMs. Scary, totally. Yes, not my vibe personally, but it is what most consumers are sort of trending towards at this point in time, which is really interesting in and of itself. And so the typical process, if you are someone who doesn't use a lot of AI, how people are using these tools to shop is they'll basically open their LLM of choice, whether that is Chat, if they're using Claude, and they'll say, Chat, I am looking for the best travel mug for someone who commutes 2 hours a day. Or I am looking for the best travel mug for someone who takes a long time to drink their coffee. And the searches are a lot more specific. They're a lot more niche than just searching Google like we did in the yesteryear. And they're also something that's really, really important, and I really, really want you guys to hear, is these results are intended to make the end user happy, right? So something that's kind of interesting, if you think about it, is the way that an LLM makes money, the way that OpenAI makes money is by people using the service more and more. And so they want people to have a good experience. They do not want to give people bad recommendations. They do not want to have people make purchases that they are unhappy with. The entire point of these systems is to keep you engaged, keep you speaking to them. The classic, like, you're right, you set a boundary. Like, we all joke about how Chat or Claude, whatever you're using, is so positive when it speaks to us. And that's just sort of, they make money by people using the platform. And so they want people to have a good experience. And so something that's really important to remember in that is that they don't want to give any bad recommendations. And how does something like an LLM with no subjective taste formulate an objective opinion on what is the best product for the search? That is done by pulling morsels of truth from across the internet. And so it's indexing things like Reddit. I saw someone the other day describe Reddit as the modern day Library of Alexandria, which is so funny. But they're pulling from places like Reddit. They're pulling from listicles. Like, how are you showing up as a full brand and story is now much more important than it ever has been. But we still can't forget about the human part of selling, right? So the question now becomes, how do we all as marketers balance human-focused creative strategy as well as activities and strategies that lend themselves to showing up better and being more accommodating to agentic-led shopping by consumers and humans. Last week, to summarize again, we talked about this idea, and this is what we're really going to get into today. We talked about this idea of brand storytelling versus brand enforcement. And so brand storytelling exists sort of squarely on the side of human-focused creative strategy, right? Brand storytelling is what you do on your organic and your own channels. We talked last week about a very particular example of, affiliate and creator focused content. And brand storytelling is all about taking what brand is and then dispersing it in a way that feels specific to sort of each persona that you're looking to target. Brand enforcement, however, is this idea of taking what is true and what is known about your brand and repeating it again and again and again and again. And that is the crux and driver behind any of the agentic-led shopping work that I'm doing at this point in time. How do I consistently get my message out there? We use the Make Believe Mug Company last week to talk about a specific brand truth that is around portability and ease of mind. And I kind of want to continue on that thread today when we talk about the difference between enforcement and storytelling and how different activities sort of fit in those two buckets in different ways. I will say before we go down either of those roads, talking about activities or kind of strategies for brand storytelling or brand enforcement, we have to first elevate up to the brand level conversation because I think it's important. And I think that sometimes when we, at least when I won't bring you into this, but when I get into really tactical episodes, I forget to show my work in a way and explain how I get to certain places. So I'm going to talk about how I start to formulate an idea of brand that will help me put together a creative strategy that speaks both to humans as well as sort of forward thinking, allows us to trend well within agentic-led shopping spaces. So when it comes to actually sort of onboarding and starting to work with a brand and looking to develop that idea of brand that will lend itself to crafting my creative strategy, I start always with competitors. And this is why I kind of wanted to zoom out and talk about this process because it looks different now that I'm looking to both do the brand storytelling side and the brand enforcement side. So typically what I would do before is I would start working with a brand and I would look to immediately put down competitors into a matrix. And so how I worked that matrix out was a little bit subjective most of the time because I think that's the special sauce that I bring to my work, I guess, is my own brain and my own subjective thoughts. But what I would typically do is I would put together an audience matrix and there are two axes, right? So we're just looking at kind of a quadrant and I would rank competitors based on the price of the product, and the center of the competitor matrix is always the owned brand that we're talking about. And so I would plot competitors based on price, whether they are more or less expensive than what I'm selling. And then also the other axis was brand. And brand is a really interesting one because I tend to not think about brand as, who has nice elevated photography and who is working with a Kardashian or something. Brand to me is always tied back to what is the consumer sentiment around this brand. It's how well known is it and how do people regard this brand. So I'd rank competitors based on those two factors, price and quote unquote brand. One thing I like to do as well when I'm formulating that top layer of brand strategy is I do not think about competitors as existing only within the same category as the product that I'm talking about. And so I will add to the matrix weird third options. And I think I referenced this recently in an episode, but I do think that's because I have this background in political strategy. And so there's always a very clear opponent. There's someone you're running against, but there's also this weird third option, which is just that people don't vote, and people don't vote all the time. It's constant. Voter turnout is so ass. It's people, you need to vote. Anyway, I'll get off my soapbox. So I try to also weave in things that aren't, direct competitors. So if I'm selling, let's say, phone cases, a phone case might not necessarily always be the competitor. What I try to sort of envelope into my thinking around competitors is where else are people spending their money if not on this? And it's easier for some brands than it is for others. To be honest, phone case is a bad example because you're buying it with a explicit purchase. But when you're looking at building a competitor matrix out for like an app or a service, that's when you can really get into the meat of thinking about what else are people going to spend their money on that's not necessarily maybe another like workout class subscription or something similar. You know what I mean? It really opens you up to addressing the customer where they actually are, as opposed to creating this unnecessary beef between like Coca-Cola and Pepsi, which is like, I wouldn't touch Pepsi with a 10-foot pole. I'm not Britney Spears. Pepsi is not Pepsi to me. It is knockoff Coke. So there's like something really interesting to be said about like, for me, the competitor is not necessarily Pepsi. If I'm not getting a Coke, I'm going to get like an iced tea. You know what I mean? This is a very simple example, but it's just really good to give yourself a more robust view of who your actual competitors are when you start to do the work of figuring out like, what is my brand? How do I want to show up? Don't stick to linear competitors only. Think about the weird third option. Where are people going to spend their money if not on your product? And start mapping that out. The other thing I'll do is I will break out my competitor matrix by not just like a holistic brand view, but I break it out by product, not by persona. Don't start, we're not there yet. So I will break out each main product. And I've worked with brands who have quite a few SKUs, and so that's not really possible. If I were doing this for Apple, you know what I'm going to talk about. I'm going to talk about my iPad. If you've ever listened to this podcast before, you know I love to talk about my iPad. So if I were breaking out brand for e-com, performance-driven marketing for Apple, I would break out my competitor matrix into probably phone, tablet, computer, headphones. That's sort of, and I guess watch. I don't really care about an Apple Watch, but that's how I would split it out amongst like main categories of product. This really is dependent on what you sell right now, how you can break things up. I do just think it's helpful sometimes to break it down at the category level. If you're a brand with multiple SKUs, it's just helpful to see what people are doing in more specific spaces. Anyway, moving on from that, that's sort of my initial first touch. The layer that I've added in now that I am cognizant that the foundational brand work I'm doing is going to lead to strategies around agentic-led shopping is I have started to use sort of the native AI search results on platform. I'm very excited about this, okay? I'm truly very excited about this, and I've been finding some like very interesting pieces of info from doing this with clients that I'm working with. And so essentially I'm just using, like I said, the native AI search sort of summaries within platforms. So within TikTok, within Instagram, not so much Pinterest, but those two very distinctly to understand what people are seeing when they search on those platforms. And so what I mean by that is I will look up search sort of keywords that I found from doing intent-based work kind of higher up. So anything with SEMrush where I'm looking at how are people actually searching for this product, what are some of the things that come up, I'll then take those into these platforms and look up similar questions or similar queries on TikTok, for example. And now TikTok does this very nice thing for us as marketers where they use their native AI to summarize all the content that has been uploaded about that subject. And so let's say it is, again, the Make Believe Mug Company. What I look up is, this is travel mug. Let's start simple. Just look up travel mug. You will see when you do this, I can't show you. I will upload a screenshot on LinkedIn, but you'll see sort of summaries of like titles. So smart enough to split it off into brands. And then it will also split up like sentiment that it is reading from the video. Obviously, as with all the time, you really need to take what you are receiving from AI with a grain of salt. But this is actually a very good practical application. And I was talking about this last week. Like, I am anti stupid AI. And so sometimes an LLM is really good for a job. And this is one of those jobs that it's really good for. You know, it's like just scraping what has been uploaded and then telling me a quick summary of it. Kind of a perfect job for an AI agent. Anyway, that is kind of a net new part of the process when I am looking into competitors and formulating where we are on the landscape. And what I started to do when I was doing this sort of organic native AI level search is I started poking around not in how my own brands and products are being received, but how competitors are. So I was really looking at how are people talking about competitors in the space and what is the language that they're using. And then I sort of poked around for a few days, looking at different brands, looking at different content that people uploaded organically about those brands. And I started to formulate hypotheses based around the white space in the market. And that is because the goal of this new function in my process is not so much to just see how do people post about the next travel mug in line. What I really wanted to see is what people are not saying, because the real advantage, if you have made it we're halfway through this pod, if you've made it halfway through, you get the major key that I've unlocked, which is finding sort of specificity in the way that you are writing about your brand and the way that you are enforcing that brand truth, and figuring out what are the highest yield opportunities to lean into. What I mean by that, I hate when people use really broad language like that. What I mean by that is what I may have found if I'm looking at travel mugs is no one has ever produced, and this is made up, I'm lying, but maybe I've seen that everyone's common complaint is that the travel mugs are not meant for people with really short fingers, okay? Maybe that is the white space I've identified in the market. Nobody is talking to the people with short fingers who want to comfortably hold a travel mug. And that is probably something that folks with short fingers, I don't know why I use that example, by the way, because I have freakishly long fingers, and now I'm very conscious about not putting them in the frame. Anyway, nobody's speaking to the short fingered community. And so that is a huge white space that I will take note of. I won't commit it as this is our brand truth. We're going to start heading into PR listicles about hands and how this is the perfect mug if you have short fingers. Not quite. I just look to identify trends like that. And that is something that's always going to be sort of human skill, where you just have to scan and scan and scan and scroll and scroll and scroll. And what you should be looking for if you want to do this work strategically is you should be looking for those white spaces. Don't look at what everybody's doing, because everybody is already doing that. And the flattening that we always discuss of language and content, it's really interesting to see it play out in real time. And, any creative strategist sort of working in the field lately will talk to you about Andromeda and meta and how important creative diversity is, but people often don't take that message as it should be taken, which is it also applies to just sort of generally what's going on beside you on the feed, right? So you don't want to look the exact same as everyone. So if you're doing this research and you're looking at what everyone's talking about and you're writing it down and you're thinking, okay, well, we'll start maybe leak proof is the number one spoken about USP for travel mugs. It's very obvious that that's how people will be searching. That's the benefit that people are looking for. And so I'm not going to produce a ton of content and really over index on this idea of being leak proof, because the market is so saturated. I'm not going to necessarily turn up when someone asks what's the best leak proof mug. Doing this exercise and using these native AI summaries and just digging into what actually exists in the competitor landscape is, again, I've said this a lot, but it's all about finding the white space. So once I've done that and I've found the true white space and I've located a couple potential opportunities, what I do from that point when I'm formulating this is still kind of brand level thought on where I'm going to go for my creative strategy, I then start thinking about personas. Before I keep going, I think it's really important to call out folks who tend to create a strategy and they tend to create personas without doing this layer of competitor research, because part of the problem is that we tend to go too broad when we start thinking about who our target persona is and we dig into our segmentation. We go way too broad, and broadening things out used to be a stupid idea, but it's completely moronic if you want to trend well in this agentic-led shopping conversation, because the nicher you can make your own understanding of brand and the nicher you can make your own understanding of persona, the more likely you are to succeed in this net new environment. So how I formulate personas is very interesting because I have all this work, right, that's about competitors. I have all this work that's about intent. And so again, this is a very human part of the process, but you need to take everything that you have. So that intent research, that competitor research, and amalgamate it into, not a like single document, but a single space where you can kind of look at it all. This is just my process. It's very helpful for me to really figure out what are people searching for? What are people buying? And then where are again, I'm going to say the words white space within all of that we can really crank the dial up. I think the problem that I find when I'm being so honest with you guys, okay? The problem that exists for most brands that I talk to who need help, who are seeing performance dip, is that they are too invested in their own product. And they believe that they don't have to niche down because their product is so good and so brilliant and so groundbreaking that they don't have to do any real work to market it. I see this from like bigger brands and smaller brands. Anyone can be afflicted by delusion. And so doing this actual intent and then competitor research allows you to see where the actual opportunity is to market your product rather than just putting out a list of USPs and expecting people to buy it because you think it's the best one on the market. That almost never happens. I hate to burst your bubble if you think that you've created like the greatest swimwear brand of all time, you know? It's just not the truth. And you have to figure out how to market it. And figuring out how to market it is figuring out where are the actual opportunities in the market itself. So once I do that and I've come to this is also, I think, important. I get asked this question a lot. When I'm putting together personas, it's almost like because of the research I've done, the personas tend to pop up very naturally. And if you go through that process of doing some intent research and then some competitor research, I think that you will see that what I'm saying is the truth, which is, yeah, the personas tend to make themselves apparent to you very clearly in doing that work. You have to do the actual work. You can't just prompt it. Like you need to get down and dirty and be kind of looking at and living with these personas. So say for my Make Believe Mug company, I've done all this work. I found this intent. I'm focusing on people with short fingers and also small hands and also people who have a long commute. So their coffee is staying warmer longer. Those are kind of the tenants, the white spaces that I've seen. And so I then formulate the personas around like who has small hands. This is not a good example. I always do this where it's like I prep the philosophical ideas behind the work that I do, and I do not give myself enough time to think of a good example. And then I'm talking about small hands and short fingers on the pod, which, I don't know, it doesn't make a whole lot of sense. But anyway, I have been thinking and sort of living with these personas and their problems for a long time. So it's easy at this stage to formalize who they are. And then from there, what I do is I start to put together a board in Figma. You can do this really anywhere, but I put together a board of muses for each persona specifically. And this is something that I think I've talked about before, but is a really important part of my process. And I will kind of get back on my soapbox. People are so in their own algorithms these days that there's no option moving forward to put your brand as it is in its little brand world in front of people and for them to react positively to it. You need to step inside their world because, like I mentioned, we are so trained now to not be challenged in our views and not be served something that doesn't immediately back up the way that we think and what we want to see. And so part of being good at marketing is seeing that, recognizing it, and knowing that you have to step up the way that you are formulating content, and you need to have a incredibly high hit rate when it comes to creating content and translating your brand story into highly resonant content for a specific persona. That is like the most, I think, in-demand skill right now in the entire creative field is that idea of translation. And again, you can't do that without all of the research that I've laid out today. And so really focusing on trying to find muses that ground these personas that you have so that you can stay on top of what their content looks like and ultimately create things that are stronger and have that higher hit rate. That's why I do this part before I start creating content, or before I start with the next phase that I'm going to talk about, which is the Aves classic, a message box. But it's a really important layer, and it's a really important time to do this work of figuring out who posts similar content to what my persona wants to see, marking that down for yourself, and creating like a consistency in the way that you're speaking to them. Next, spoiler alert, as I just said, I tend to put together a message box. A message box is something I use all the time. It's basically a quadrant with 4 different things to fill out. Box 1, us on us. So what do you say about yourself as a brand as it pertains to this specific persona? Next is us on them. How do we as a brand think of this persona within our sort of overall brand hierarchy? Them on us. How does this target persona think about our brand and our product? And then them on them. How does this persona perceive themselves? These 4 boxes, filling them out with as much information as you can is sort of the key to crafting a persona strategy that holds its weight, to be honest. And so really having a 360 all-encompassing view of this person really helps with both sides. So on the human-centric creative strategy side, you're going to be leaning a lot on how do I get the message of us on us over to the them on them quadrant. Yeah. So that's what you want to do. Is like, how do I tell this story in a way that fits into how they think about themselves and fits into how they sort of think about the world in a larger scale? And then on the other side, when we're thinking about agentic, you want to almost do the opposite. So it's like, how am I going to take how they think and feel and the way that they're going to look for this product and then turn it into a brand? How do we actually enforce those things as being brand itself? And that is where we then get to the layer of crafting strategies for both. And so where I'm at right now is I'll do all that sort of brand foundational work. I'll do all that work with putting together personas, putting together healthy systems to get like highly resonant content made for those personas through the muses. I'll do the message box for each persona so I really know what language and angles to use to talk to them. But something to mention too, none of this is ever written in stone with me. I love to build strategy from both research and thoughts and then also like real world integration and plugin. And so I actually start doing the work and creating content and doing all that translation stuff before I set my strategy in stone so that I can actually test and see what's working. But once you get to that layer, that's when you start to think of an actual strategy to deploy, which comes down to really thinking about the tactics that are going to get you there. And this is sort of where we're going to wrap on this episode. I wanted to give you guys more of a background into how we get to this point, because next week we're going to talk more about how do you actually formulate a creative strategy? And we're only going to talk about the human side. And so we're just going to talk about what activities do you kind of lay out? Where do you go from all of this research into the actual, again, I keep saying this word, I think it's really important, translation of strategy into action is sort of the rough definition of creative strategy, in my opinion, as a performance marketer. And so that is all of the thinking that we do, and I wanted to package it in that sort of human and agentic-led shopping way, because that's how I'm doing it right now. And it's fun, it's interesting. Some of the stuff that I'm uncovering when I'm using summaries within these platforms has been really like fundamental to putting together a rough draft strategy on how to really tackle the agentic-led shopping age, because I think we've got a few months, but I do believe this Q4, we're going to see a lot of people using their LLMs for gifting specifically, asking chat everything you know about me and my partner. What is like the best thing to get for him for Christmas is an easy question, right? So we want to figure out how to surface in those conversations before they happen. And this is a really fun, good first step if you want to smash Q4. I have already said stock the pond. I'm thinking of Q4 already. So yeah, that was kind of a workflow tactical episode. And then next week, we're going to talk about what is creative strategy? Who needs it? Why is everyone talking about it? What does it even look like? I think that'll be a very fun episode. But yeah, hopefully that was helpful. If you have any questions, let me know. I will post about some of the organic in-platform stuff on LinkedIn, Aves, Valerio. And yeah, we'll keep talking next week about creative strategy. What does that even mean? Why is everyone hiring for it? Oh my goodness. And yeah, thanks so much for listening. Hopefully that made sense. If you have any questions, feel free to head over to the Pilot House website. You can fill out a lead form and we can chat directly. We're here to help. So thanks again for listening, and I'll talk to you guys next week.